Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is allocate. And this was a verb that was suggested by the viewer Luis, so thank you so much for that suggestion. Just recently, I had a student ask for a little help with the pronunciation of this verb. They were getting a little hung up on the second syllable. They saw the letter O, and they wondered, why am I not saying allocate, right? And this is something that happens quite often in English where we take vowel sounds and we shorten it to the sound that's a schwa sound. And that's what happens in this word. So your second syllable is really requires the least amount of movement from your mouth to make this vowel sound, okay? So our verb of the day is allocate. Now let's take a moment and review some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear allocate used can mean to set something apart for a special purpose. Another related verb to this definition might be to designate, right? So we're saying this is for that, okay? A second way you'll hear allocate used can mean to distribute according to a plan. And another verb that connects this definition is allot. So we're going to see many examples today of this verb being used with money or with funds. And so many times people make a plan, right? We're going to spend this much on this category and then a different amount on a second category and so forth. And then when you spend those funds, right, you're distributing according to your plan. For now, you should know that allocate is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you need to drop the E before you add ing. And the reason we're doing that is our verb ends in the pattern vowel consonant E. Okay? Now, when we make the past tense and the participle forms of our verb, we can just add D since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, allocate, though it ends with the letter E, it ends with a T sound. Okay? Our E is silent when we say that base verb. So this means our ed ending is going to add an extra syllable to the verb. The sound we're going to make is an id sound. Okay? Our past tense and participle forms of our verb should sound like this: allocated, allocated. Now, there is a phrasal or three phrasal verbs that I want us to study and talk a little bit about. You're going to notice the meaning here is all very close to what we've already discussed, but we're going to talk about allocate among to start with. So here we're giving some part or we're portioning something off to several people or several groups. I want us to think about here kind of three or more, okay? So let's take a look at an example of this phrasal verb in a sentence. They allocate their charitable donations among 5 different nonprofits in their community. Right? So maybe we're talking about a couple or a family, right? And this particular group, right, thinks about, okay, here's how much money I want to donate, and they're going to give some to one, some to a second, to a third, to a fourth, and now to a fifth. Our second phrasal verb is to allocate between. Again, our meaning here is we're giving or we're portioning something off, but here, the reason we use between is we're talking about either two people or two groups. An example of this: I've been allocating my free time between gardening and exercising. Okay, so these are more like two activities, right? But these two things are getting or receiving my free time. Okay? The last phrasal verb we'll talk about is to allocate to. Okay? Here, again, we're giving some small part or we're portioning off, but here we're doing it to a single person or a single group. An example of this: the boss allocated that project to Mike. Right? So only one person receiving it. Okay? So I hope you can see the definitions there are very similar. It really depends on the particle you use, is kind of based on how many people or things are receiving the activity. Okay? Now let's continue using our verb of the day. Today I thought we would review the simple present and the present perfect. We'll start with the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about our habits and our routines. So these are actions that repeat again and again, usually with some known or understood frequency, right? So it might be something that happens once a day, or maybe only once a month or once a year. But again, we know that that action is going to repeat. Okay? Another reason we use it is with facts. Okay? Now, when we go to make affirmative sentences in the simple present, we must pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, okay, we're just going to use the base verb, so no special endings on the verb. But if our subject is he, she, or it, then I need to add an S to the end of the verb. Let's take a look at an affirmative example. The U.S. federal government allocates billions of dollars to help those affected by natural disasters each year. Okay? So here, federal government refers to kind of the national government in the United States, so not each individual state's government, but our national or federal. Okay? And this is a true statement, a factual statement. As they create budgets and plans, right, they set aside billions of dollars to help people who might be affected by hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, etc. Now, let's talk about making negative sentences in the simple present. Again, we have to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we're going to use do not and then the base verb. If our subject is he, she, or it, use does not and then the base verb. Don't add an S here in the negative. Let's take a look at an example. Our state leaders don't allocate enough to assist the unhoused. Okay, so that might be a slightly new word for some people, unhoused, who might be more familiar with homeless, but our language always changes. And there are groups of people that feel like homeless might be kind of a hurtful word. It casts some judgment, and a better term to use is unhoused. So you might see that more frequently in various writings and hear it in people's speech. Okay. Now let's talk about making a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, start with do or does, then you're going to have your subject, and then the base verb. So again, no S in my yes or no question. The only time I'm doing that is in the affirmative when my subject is he, she, or it. Let's take a look at our last simple present example. Do you allocate money in your budget for entertainment? Right? So this is a question asking about someone's habit or their routine. Right? And kind of want to know, do you designate a certain amount of money for kind of entertainment, things that you find fun? That could be movies, music, concerts, it could be your hobbies, right? Could be anything. Now let's move on and talk about the present perfect. We use this verb tense in a couple different situations. The first situation is to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present. A second reason people will use present perfect in their writing or their speech is to describe an action that occurred at some unknown point in the past. Many books call this the indefinite past tense. Okay? Really, what it means is it doesn't matter so much. We know when something happened. We just know that that action was completed at some point in the past. Now, to make present perfect sentences, we must pay attention to our subjects. Okay? If our subject is I, you, we, or they, you'll use have and then our participle form of the verb. Okay? But if the subject is he, she, or it, you'll use has, and then the participle form of a verb. And as a little reminder, our participle is the same as the past tense because this is a regular verb. Let's take a look at an affirmative example. The European Union has allocated 20 million euros in emergency humanitarian aid to Haiti. Okay? This occurred at some point in the past year. I don't remember exactly when, but I know this action is completed. Okay? When you go to make negative present perfect sentences, again, you pay attention to your subject and choose have or has, then insert not before the participle form of the verb. You might hear have not combined into the contraction haven't, or has not combined into the contraction hasn't. Let's take a look at another example. We haven't allocated money to repairing and improving our sidewalks. I saw a statement from a mayor, from a city government official, talking about people's complaints. People were saying, we don't have good sidewalks, they're not safe, people are tripping and falling and hurting themselves. And we're allocating, or admitting, going back up until this present moment of speaking, we haven't done this action in recent times. Now let's talk about making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, start with have or has, then you're going to have your subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Have you allocated your time well to finish the project by the end of the week? Right? So you might hear a statement like this from a supervisor or a manager, maybe offering some assistance or some advice to encourage this person, kind of budget your time, plan so that this particular thing gets finished in time. Now let's continue reviewing some words that are related to our verb allocate. The first word we're going to look at is the noun allocation. This noun can have a couple meanings like our verb. The first way to use the noun is to talk about the action or the process of allocating or distributing something. An example of this might be, we need to examine the allocation of natural resources. This is becoming a bigger concern, particularly as there are droughts and not enough water in certain communities, right? People get to thinking about, okay, how are we using or how are we setting aside water for certain purposes? But it could be, this sentence really could be about any natural resource. A second way to use the noun allocation is to talk about an amount or a portion of a resource that has been assigned to some particular recipient. An example of this, have we received our allocation for our fees and services? Right? So sometimes organizations partner together for a project or a piece of work, right? And so maybe as they made a plan, they set aside, right, our organization is going to receive this much, right? Now we're saying, have we received that amount that was set aside for us? The next word we'll talk about is the noun allocator. This could be a person or a thing that allocates or makes into portions. So an example of this. The allocator is focused on funding projects from young entrepreneurs. Okay. This sentence came from, I believe it was a press release, right? Soliciting sort of new ideas, proposals, as people kind of start or create new products and businesses. So this person who's going to be giving funding to different groups, right? They want to especially work with younger people who are just beginning their businesses. The last word we'll talk about today is the adjective allocable. This means able to be allocated. An example of this in a sentence might be, just because a cost is allocable to a contract doesn't make it an allowable expense for government cost accounting purposes. Okay? So here, right, they're saying even though we can kind of portion off or say this money was used for this purpose, it doesn't mean the funds are sort of approved for that particular cost. Thanks again to Louise for suggesting today's verb. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great day.